What does it mean to be a conservative in the United States? That's the question surrounding this video. What's your standard for conservatism? And when we look at things that mainstream conservatives are putting out there, and I'm going to show you one here. When we look at, for example, this tweet from Charlie Kirk, who is the CEO of Turning Point USA, he says here, I believe marriage is one man, one woman. Also, gay people should be welcome in the conservative movement. As Christians, we are called to love everyone. I will always stand against people who wish to establish their own personal values as a reason to kick others out of our movement. Listen, as the conservative movement, there are certain lines we have to draw in the sand. You can't just allow everybody in the movement. You have to ground what your standard of conservative is. What separates, socially speaking, the left from the right? What separates progressives from conservatives? Because progressives, they do not sacrifice their values. They do not compromise on what they believe. If you are against abortion, progressives do not allow you in their movement. If you are against LGBT, progressives do not allow you in their movement. However, why is the conservative movement, why are leaders in the conservative movement like Charlie Kirk compromising on our biblically traditional values? And if you think while watching this that, well, biblical traditional values is not necessary to be a conservative, then I ask you, what is your standard for conservatism? Because if it doesn't ground itself in biblical traditional values, which is the same values that our forefathers adopted, it's the same values even that the Democrat Party adopted up until like 2012, then what is your standard, your moral standard for the conservative movement? Because if you just allow anybody in, like, for example, this woman, Amber Rose, who was invited to speak at the Republican National Convention, and which, by the way, she also led the slut walk movement in LA. She's pro-abortion. She's pro-feminism. She's pro-LGBT. She's pro all of the things that are counter to what Christ teaches. It's true, as Charlie Kirk put here, that it is important as Christians that we love everyone, but there's a continuation from that as a Christian. You love everyone and you want them to go forward and sin no more. That is the teachings of Jesus Christ. He didn't simply tell the prostitutes that he loves them and that's it. End of story. No, that's not the end of the story. The second part of that is that go forward and sin no more. We have to draw lines in the sand to what it is to be a conservative. You have this conservative movement that is being led by gay people, feminists, pro-abortionists. You have organizations like PragerU, Turning Point USA, Daily Wire that are blurring the lines of what our standard is in the conservative movement. Our moral standard that separates us from the left is biblical traditional values. The moment you remove that as our standard, then we are a standardless movement. And everything becomes subjective. Our morality then at that point becomes subjective, whatever is most convenient. And the conservative movement is trying to posture itself and advertise itself and market itself that we're popular. We want to reach as many people in this culture as we can. We need to get as many people as we can get to vote, even if that means compromising on our historically biblical traditional values. What is the conservative movement turning into? And I have debated this with so many people in the sphere that I share the space with, and many of them, most of them, I would say, call me a radical, call me an extremist for holding biblical traditional values. Then what do you mean by conservative? And please tell me how that separates itself from progressives. When we have leaders in this movement that are totally going against the teachings of Christ, then how are you still conservative? What is it that you're fighting to conserve? If you're allowing anybody with any ideology to be poster childed as a conservative, you're having Amber Rose, who's an active porn star, has an OnlyFans account, who is actively living in sin. This is not a reformed person that has turned her life over to Christ. This is a person that's continuing actively living in sin. How is that conservative? What's conservative about that? What values are people like Amber Rose fighting to conserve? And my question is, why are these organizations like PragerU, Turning Point USA, Daily Wire, Fox News even, why do they hire token gay people? Why do they hire token feminists? Why do they hire token black people when DEI is totally against what we believe? You should hire people off of merit. You should hire people that actually hold principled conservative values. Conservatism today is totally an empty term. It's a term that has next to no meaning. And if you prescribe no meaning to it, then what's different between a conservative and a progressive? It is a wrong move to try and win over culture. Progressives are the ones that are steering and directing what culture is. They're the ones telling us that we're bigots if we think a marriage is between a man and a woman. That doesn't mean that we cave in and we give into it. They also think that children should have access to chemical castrating drugs. They also think that girls that are minors under the age of 18 can get full-on hysterectomies by the parents' consent. Right now, that sounds wrong, right? Well, guess what? Same-sex marriage sounded wrong 20 years ago. But now we all accept it, right? Because that's what culture is telling us. We need to be popular. If we don't dare give in, then the left is going to call us bigots. The left is going to say that we're bullies. The left is going to say that we're phobic this and phobic that, so we must give in. I don't even recognize the conservative movement. What is conservative about it? Because when somebody asks me, what am I? Well, how do I identify politically? I say I'm a biblically traditional conservative. Otherwise, it carries no meaning. What does it even mean? When you say that gay people can be part of our movement, somebody that's actively living in sin is an oxymoron to conservative. A conservative woman dresses traditionally. She doesn't dress in a sports bra and go out in public and record videos and take pictures of herself dressed half naked. That's not conservative. That's not traditional. That's not modest. Part of being traditional is dressing modestly, acting modestly, living a biblically traditional lifestyle. It's crazy that people in my own movement, or a movement that I at least considered myself to be a part of at one point, say that I'm an extremist. It wasn't even 10 years ago that everybody on this side would have agreed to the things that I'm saying. It shows you the influence that culture has on the youth. It shows you the influence that culture has in our politics. It even shows you the influence that culture has in our churches. So many pastors are unwilling to speak out against abortion, which by definition, even from biologists that are not theists, that don't even claim to have a belief in God necessarily, agree that life begins at the point of conception. In other words, life begins at the point that the sperm enters the egg. That's when life begins. Scientifically, that is when life begins. So, abortion is murder. How can pastors just not stand against that when presented with the opportunity? We have an identity crisis with all of these trans people that want to find something to identify as that's not how God made them. And yet you have people that are on the conservative side affirming it. People that are conservative affirming the delusion. I'm telling you right now, it's not even going to be 10 years before it is commonplace to accept that, okay, children, as long as they have the parents' consent, can get chemical castrating drugs and puberty blockers. And young girls, even at the age of 14, 15, can get hysterectomies, full-on hysterectomies, get their breasts chopped off, so long as their parents agree with it. Right? Because if we're just allowing culture to steer us, and we don't draw lines in the sand, and like Charlie Kirk said, anybody is allowed in our movement. Listen, you can vote for whoever you want to vote for. You want to vote for a Republican, you want to vote for a Democrat, you want to vote for an independent. You can exercise your right to vote as an American citizen. But the conservative movement has to be grounded in something of substance. Our moral standard has always been grounded in Jesus Christ. And if you remove that, then it's no longer the conservative movement that it once was. And if you remove that moral standard, then what are you fighting to conserve?